The winds along the naval base carried that familiar mix of jet fuel, sea salt, and anticipation. It was early morning, the kind of gray sunrise that made everything look almost unreal, like the world itself was holding its breath. And that's when she arrived, quietly, unnoticed, without ceremony. Just a lone figure stepping out of a government transport vehicle, a small duffel slung over her shoulder. She looked like any other newcomer, fresh-faced, dressed in standard fatigues, eyes calm but observant. No one knew her. No one paused long enough to care. And that was exactly what she wanted. Before we begin, the narrator's voice tightened, if you're watching this, welcome to United War, where hidden stories from the front lines come alive. The hook lingered like a warning, because today's story is about the kind of mistake no one on that base will ever forget. Her name, at least the one they were allowed to know, was Ilara Briggs. At first glance, she didn't strike anyone as special. Young, disciplined, quietly confident, typical traits you'd expect from the countless recruits arriving each month. She walked with the efficient, steady pace of someone who understood structure, order, and training. But beneath that controlled calm was something else, something sharper. She wasn't just observing the base, she was evaluating it. The Marines at Checkpoint Alpha didn't even look twice. They scanned her clearance badge, assuming she was another low-ranking assigned officer. If they had bothered to run the deeper ID protocol, if they had seen the hidden encryption, this story would have gone very differently. But they didn't. And by the time she crossed into the compound, the stage had already been set for the embarrassing disaster that was about to unfold. As she walked toward the main housing wing, a group of 5 young Marines lingered nearby, half bored, half alert, trying to look busy. They noticed her immediately, not because she stood out, but because new arrivals were easy targets for jokes, mock drills, and light hazing. Small traditions they believed made the base stronger. They nudged each other, whispering their own commentary, sizing her up without any idea who they were looking at. She simply nodded politely and kept walking. But one of the Marines stepped forward, blocking her path. "You lost, newbie?" he asked with that half smirk that came from too much confidence and too little experience. She paused just long enough to be respectful. "Not at all, just making my way to housing." Her tone was even, measured, no trace of sarcasm, no sign of challenge. This only encouraged them further. Another Marine, tall and built like he lived in the weight room, crossed his arms. "Housing, not before orientation, follow procedure." He wasn't wrong, unless you were someone whose clearance level went beyond theirs, someone who didn't need orientation. Someone who outranked everyone in sight. Someone like her. But Ilara Briggs didn't correct them. She didn't flash the badge hidden beneath the outer layer of her fatigues. She didn't explain that she wasn't required to check in because she had already been here weeks earlier, disguised, evaluating their readiness. She just gave a small nod, as if she understood their misinterpreted authority. The third Marine, the loudest of the bunch, stepped around and plucked the small duffel bag off her shoulder. "Rule 1. Rookies don't carry gear until they're cleared." He wasn't trying to be cruel. Still, it was a mistake. A big one. The kind that would haunt them all when they discovered the truth. She looked at the bag, the only personal item she carried, and simply said, "Please hand that back." No edge, no anger, just a calm request. But something about her tone triggered a reaction. They laughed, assuming her seriousness was just nerves. They didn't listen. They never even considered that she might not be who they thought she was. The moment stretched, quiet, tense, heavy with all the things about to go wrong. She took a small breath, lifted her eyes, and spoke with a soft firmness. "If you don't give that back, you're going to regret it." The words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like an inevitability. Of course, they laughed harder. Then came the mistake. The tall Marine tried to push her lightly aside, a playful tap meant to establish dominance, but she didn't move. His wrist instead met a wall of precision. In one fluid, impossible motion, she had turned, locked his arm, and brought him to one knee without even appearing to try. He froze, stunned. His friends froze too. She released him instantly. No showmanship, no aggression, just efficiency. But now their pride was wounded, and wounded pride on a military base was dangerous. 3 of them lunged. What happened next was a blur, a quiet storm of motion, discipline, and controlled force. She didn't strike them. She redirected them. Every move she made was textbook perfect, almost too perfect, the kind of mastery only elite special forces possessed. Within seconds, all 3 were on the ground, staring up at her with the wide-eyed realization that they had just tangled with someone far, far above their training level. She stepped back, adjusting the sleeve of her uniform as if nothing had happened. A few nearby soldiers witnessed the scene and erupted into shocked murmurs. Who is she? Where'd she learn that? Did she just... Answers began to form, but none were correct. Not yet. The base commander, alerted by the sudden cluster of radio chatter, stepped out from his office. He saw the Marines on the ground. He saw her standing calmly. And then he saw the badge clipped quietly inside her uniform, finally visible as the wind shifted. His face went pale. Because the badge didn't belong to a recruit. It belonged to the one person outranking nearly everyone on base. Rear Admiral Elara Briggs, newly assigned commanding officer of the entire installation. The commander snapped to attention so fast it startled everyone. "Admiral on deck!" Silence. Pure, horrified silence. The Marines who had mocked her struggled to their feet, staring at her as if they'd just picked a fight with a ghost. And in that moment, every mistake they'd made, every joke, every shove, every assumption came crashing down on them like a tidal wave. She looked at them, calm and unreadable, and said only, "We'll discuss discipline later." Her voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, controlled, powerful. And that terrified them more than anything else. The silence after her announcement felt like a physical pressure settling over the courtyard. No one moved, no one breathed, and the Marines who had confronted her looked like they wished the ground would swallow them whole. Elara Briggs, the woman they had mistaken for an inexperienced recruit, now stood as the highest-ranking officer many of them would ever serve under. And yet her expression remained calm, neutral even, giving no hint of the discipline or consequences that awaited them. She simply retrieved her duffel bag from the stunned Marine's trembling hands and walked past them without another word. As she entered the main administrative wing, whispers rippled through the corridors. Word spread faster than wildfire. The new girl was the new Admiral. Some were shocked, some were embarrassed. Others were impressed, even inspired, especially those who had witnessed her dismantle 3 trained Marines with quiet precision. But for the ones who had misjudged her, dread settled in like a cold shadow. Elara moved with composed steps toward the command office, her presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. Officers stiffened at their desks. Technicians stood a little straighter. Even the security personnel seemed more alert. She didn't walk like someone hungry for authority. She walked like someone who had spent her entire life earning it. Every step carried purpose, not ego. Inside the commander's office, the base's second-in-command, Colonel Farrow, waited nervously. He had received only fragments of the chaotic reports, an altercation, 3 Marines down, a possible breach of conduct. He had been prepared to intervene, to de-escalate whatever disciplinary mess awaited him. But when she walked in and the commander stood ramrod straight, Farrow understood instantly. This wasn't a mess. This was a wake-up call. "Admiral Briggs," the commander began carefully, we weren't expecting you for another 2 days." She studied him quietly before responding. "That was intentional. I wanted to observe the base without preparation. Real behavior reveals itself when people think no one important is watching." He swallowed hard because he knew exactly what she meant. Her unexpected arrival had exposed weaknesses, casual arrogance, lack of discipline, protocol blind spots, and she had seen them all within minutes. Colonel Farrow stepped forward, trying to recover composure. "Ma'am, if there was any disrespect—" "There was, but not because your Marines are malicious, but because they are unrefined, unchecked. They need leadership, structure, and accountability. That begins today." There was no anger in her tone, no ego, just clarity, and that alone carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. She dismissed them with a polite nod and headed toward the command center, a secure, reinforced room humming with screens, communications channels, and tactical interfaces. As she entered, every officer in the room stood instantly, a wave of respect replacing the earlier rumors and confusion. They didn't know the details, but they knew enough. The new admiral had arrived, and she was not someone to underestimate. Alara walked to the central console, where a massive digital display showed the base's logistical network, flight paths, naval patterns, satellite feeds, personnel schedules. Her eyes absorbed everything with the precision of someone who had once run missions that never made the news. Missions buried so deep, even senior officers never heard whispers of them. She asked for a status briefing, and the chief operations officer launched into a detailed report. Training cycles were behind schedule. Response teams were under strength. Drone patrols had been inconsistent. Morale fluctuated. There were cracks small enough to ignore, but large enough to doom them in a real scenario. And that's when the klaxons erupted. A piercing alarm echoed through the command center, bathing the room in red emergency lighting. Officers scrambled to stations, voices overlapping, systems activating. Alara didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She simply turned her gaze toward the nearest lieutenant. "Report." The lieutenant, startled by her calm, checked the live feed. "Unauthorized drone entering restricted perimeter, ma'am. High-speed approach, no identification signal." Another officer added, "Possible reconnaissance craft. Could be a probe, could be hostile." Alara stepped closer to the feed, watching the blurry object streak across the radar. "How long until it reaches visual range?" 20 seconds, Admiral." Her pulse didn't change. Her breathing didn't shift. Instead, she leaned slightly over the console, scanning the radar patterns with that same intense calm she displayed earlier. "Disable exterior floodlights. I want it blinded by contrast. Scramble Falcon team, but keep them on standby. No engagement until I order it." Officers exchanged quick glances. She was commanding the situation with surgical precision, confident enough to alter protocol in real time. The commander beside her whispered, "Ma'am, you've done this sort of thing before." She didn't look away from the screen. "More times than you know." The drone breached the autovisual scanners. A fuzzy image appeared. At first it looked like a standard, discrete reconnaissance device, but then it adjusted altitude, hovering with unnatural stability. "Zoom," she ordered. The image sharpened, and every officer in the room stiffened. The drone carried a payload, a compact explosive sphere, coated with directional sensors. Unauthorized surveillance was one thing. A weaponized drone was something else entirely. The base, only minutes into her command, was already facing a real threat, yet her expression remained unchanged. She motioned toward the tactical interface. "Patch me into air support and prepare electromagnetic shielding sequence." The commander looked at her with confusion. "Ma'am, that procedure has never been executed live." "That's why I'm here. This base needs to learn how to respond, not react." The officers looked at her as if she were made of steel, but before anyone could follow her next command, a tremor rippled across the radar. The drone wasn't alone. Another signal appeared. Then another. Then 5. 10. In a matter of seconds, a swarm began filling the radar. The base had minutes, maybe even less, and the new admiral had just walked into a battle no one expected.
The command center pulsed red as the alarms blared, washing the room in a tension so thick It felt like the very air was vibrating. Officers scrambled to their consoles, voices rising as the radar lit up with dozens of new contacts. The swarm was moving fast, too fast for a simple reconnaissance breach, too synchronized to be a random attack. But even with chaos pressing against the steel walls of the operations room, Admiral Ilara Briggs stood with the unshaken resolve of someone who had lived through worse storms than this. She raised one hand, not loudly, not aggressively, just firmly enough, and the room fell silent on instinct. "I want a full diagnostic on the swarm," she ordered. "Trajectory, size variations, synchronized behavior, everything." The operations chief worked quickly, fingers flying over the holographic console. "Ma'am, they're coordinated. They're maintaining a near-perfect diamond formation. Their velocity is consistent across all units." She nodded, unfazed. "These aren't standard hostile recon drones." The commander swallowed. "Then what are they?" Ilara watched the radar with narrowed eyes. "A test." Confusion rippled through the room. A test? From who? For what? But she didn't elaborate, not yet. Her mind was already moving, calculating, piecing together fragments of behavior, technology, and timing. Someone was probing the base. Someone wanted to see how they reacted, how fast they mobilized, how disciplined or vulnerable they were. She tapped one of the displays. "Activate blackout sequence. All external systems to passive mode. No heat signatures, no electronic leaks." The technician hesitated. "That will leave us blind for 30 seconds, ma'am." She looked him directly in the eye. Not blind, hidden. Her confidence left no room for doubt. The blackout sequence triggered instantly. Outside, the base lights flickered once, and then the entire installation went dark. Floodlights cut off, hangars dimmed, even the runway markers vanished. To an outside observer, or an approaching drone swarm, the entire base suddenly looked like an empty, cold patch of coastline. And still, the drones advanced. "They're deploying altitude shifts," the lieutenant whispered, voice tight with fear. "Trying to compensate. They expected a response and didn't get one." "They're guessing." "That makes them vulnerable." Colonel Farrow stared at her, finally piecing together what she already knew. "Admiral, whoever sent them doesn't know you're here." She allowed herself a small breath, "which gives us the advantage." Her next orders flowed with such precision that no one questioned them. "Bring the EMP towers online. Keep them charging, but don't fire until I say. If we mistime it, they'll scatter." The commander blinked. "Ma'am, you want to trap them." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Outside, the air hummed as the base's electromagnetic towers, rarely used, never battle-tested, began generating a pulsing wave that built quietly, invisibly, beneath the night sky. The swarm moved closer, now only a few kilometers out, their formation adjusting again, as though sniffing for signs of life. But the base remained dark and silent. Only Ilara's voice broke the tension. "Prepared to restore power to the southeast grid. 20% illumination, divert all thermal signatures to that sector." The operations officer frowned. "But that will make it look like our activity is centralized there." "Exactly," she replied softly. The drones, attracted by the sudden faint heat source on the thermal scans, immediately shifted. The swarm curved as one organism, accelerating toward the decoy sector. The officers watched in astonishment as the drones reacted exactly as she predicted. Then, one of the young Marines from earlier, the tall one whose pride she'd shattered that morning, rushed into the command center. His face was flushed, eyes wide, fear and embarrassment clashing across his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but the commander held up a hand. "Not now." But Ilara turned to face him. He swallowed hard. "Admiral, ma'am, sensors from Tower 3 just went down. We lost one of the EMP nodes." The room tensed. Losing a tower meant losing synchronization.
Losing synchronization meant losing the trap. Losing the trap meant the base would be overwhelmed. But Alara didn't react with frustration or anger. Instead, she walked toward him, stopping just inches away. Why did the node fail? I don't know. It could be power routing, could be interference, could be tampering. That word hit the room like a spark. Tampering. Alara inhaled slowly. Show me. He led her to the secondary monitoring station, where the node's feed looped in static. But Alara wasn't watching the screen. She was watching him. The same Marine who had mocked her mere hours earlier was now standing beside her, anxious, desperate to redeem himself. She spoke quietly. You were at Tower 3 earlier, weren't you? He nodded. Yes, ma'am. It's part of my patrol route. What did you see? A civilian supply unit, or what looked like one. It delivered a component to maintenance. I didn't question it. Her eyes sharpened. Show me its route. The technician pulled up the logs, and the whole command room froze. The supply cart never entered through the main gate. It materialized on the map with no origin point. A stealth insertion. Infiltration, Colonel Farrow whispered. Ilara's voice hardened. The swarm is the distraction. The real threat is already inside. The alarms intensified as the drones dove sharply, closing in on the decoy sector. Officers moved in a frenzy, but Alara remained in control, her voice slicing cleanly through the chaos. Reroute backup power to EMP Tower 3. I want that node online in 30 seconds. The technician wiped sweat from his forehead. Ma'am, 30 seconds isn't possible. It is, if you let him help. She motioned to the Marine beside her, the same Marine who had tried to bully her earlier. He blinked, stunned. Ma'am? Me? You know the tower's wiring better than anyone. You're the fastest route runner on this base. Move. Something in her tone lit a fire in him. Respect, responsibility, redemption. He straightened, saluted sharply, and sprinted down the corridor like his life depended on it. Ilara turned back to the radar. The swarm was almost in range. Admiral, the commander said quietly, we may not make it. Her jaw steadied. We will. Because of your plan? She shook her head once. Because your Marines are better than they think. The countdown began. 20 seconds. 15. 10. The drones spread into attack formation. 5 seconds. The Marine reached the tower. And just as the first drone descended into lethal range, the EMP tower flickered back to life. Ilara's voice cut through the command center with razor clarity. Fire! A shockwave exploded outward, silent, but devastating, rippling across the sky like an invisible storm. The drones froze mid-air, jittered, sparked, and then collapsed like falling stars, raining harmlessly into the ocean below. The base erupted in stunned relief. But Alara didn't celebrate, because she knew something no one else knew. This wasn't the attack. This was only the beginning.
The storm over Falcon Ridge Base had finally cleared, but inside the command center, tension still hung thick like smoke after a battle. After a night of chaos, confusion, and humiliation for the senior officers involved in the initiation prank, the entire base waited anxiously for Admiral Saren Hale's next move. No one knew whether she would demand punishment, transfer half the squadron, or quietly let it fade away. But Saren Hale had always been an unpredictable leader, calm when others were emotional, patient when others rushed, and deliberate when others panicked. As the morning sun rose over the flight line, Saren stood on the balcony overlooking the hangars. Below her, hundreds of personnel moved hurriedly, still rattled from the previous day's shock. And yet she watched them with a quiet, almost gentle expression. She wasn't angry, she was disappointed. And that, she knew, stung more than any punishment she could issue. Inside the base briefing theater, every squadron had been ordered to assemble.
Rows of pilots, engineers, Marines, analysts, and commanders filled the seats. No one spoke. No one dared. The memory of how they had mocked her, how they had treated her like an outsider, still burned in their minds. Then the doors opened. Saren Hale entered with slow, steady steps, not with security guards, not with aides, not with a display of rank or power. Just her. And that silence became even heavier. She stopped at the podium but didn't speak immediately. Instead, she scanned the room, not with anger, but with understanding. Yesterday, I walked onto this base expecting professionalism, unity, and discipline. Instead, I was treated as if I didn't belong at my own command. The room visibly flinched. But what disappointed me wasn't the prank. It was how quickly you assumed I had nothing to offer because of how I looked. My uniform, my age, my gender, none of that should matter when we wear the same flag. Several Marines dropped their gaze. She continued, her voice calm but firm. You judged me before you knew me, and that is dangerous, because judgment blinds you. It weakens your readiness, and in war, a moment of blindness gets people killed. Her words cut through the room like razor wire. Then she changed tone, surprisingly gentle. But I am not here to punish you. She paused. I am here to rebuild you. Heads rose. Eyes widened. Falcon Ridge is one of the most strategically important bases in this region. You are not children. You are not pranksters. You are warriors. And warriors learn from their mistakes, especially their most embarrassing ones. A faint, nervous ripple of laughter spread across the room. She allowed it. Saren stepped away from the podium and began pacing slowly. When I was 19, my commanding officer made the same mistake you made. He underestimated me, called me a seat filler, someone who'd never fly a combat sortie. The room leaned in. That year, I completed more successful ops than any pilot in the squadron. But I didn't prove him wrong by arguing. I proved him wrong by showing him the standard he had forgotten. She returned to the podium. That is what I expect from all of you. Suddenly, her tone sharpened. Effective immediately, Falcon Ridge Base will operate under new protocols, accountability drills, unified squadron training, zero tolerance for internal division, and most importantly, every officer will undergo leadership recalibration. Murmurs filled the room. Leadership recalibration meant long hours, hard evaluations, and psychological testing. It meant the culture of the base would change from the ground up. But Saren wasn't finished. As for Lieutenant Briggs and the officers directly involved in yesterday's creativity, the entire auditorium froze. Briggs stood stiff, bracing for termination. Saren looked at him for a long moment. You will not be punished, she said. Instead, you will assist me personally in restructuring this base. Briggs stared at her, stunned, speechless. Saren continued, if you were bold enough to orchestrate a prank like that, you are bold enough to help rebuild the culture here. I do not waste talent, even poorly directed talent. The room relaxed slightly, not relieved, but impressed. Then Saren finished with a sentence that would echo across the base for years. Respect is not given upward or downward. It is exchanged. And starting today, we will all learn to earn it. The auditorium erupted, not in applause, but in something deeper, acceptance. A new era had begun. Later that afternoon, in the flight hangar, pilots watched as Admiral Saren suited up for her first demonstration flight. Briggs approached her carefully. You really trust me with this? He asked. Saren smirked. Trust is not a gift, Lieutenant. It's a contract. And now you and I are going to sign it with action. And then, with a calmness that defined her entire career, she climbed into the cockpit of an advanced fighter jet. The engines roared. The hangar trembled. As the jet shot into the sky, carving a silver line across the horizon, Every single person at Falcon Ridge Base knew they had underestimated the wrong woman. The new girl they mocked was about to become the greatest admiral the base had ever seen.